remember this one time when I had to go into the back room of a store I worked at. It was supposed to be a regular day, nothing special. I was just there for my shift, trying to get through the hours so I could go home and relax. You know how it is when you've got a job that's not really exciting, but pays the bills. That's what this was. The job was at this big box store, the kind where you can buy anything from groceries to clothes to garden supplies. It was one of those giant warehouse-style places, with high ceilings and aisles that seemed to stretch on forever. My shift was the late one, starting in the afternoon and going into the night. By the time it was around 8 p.m., the place had pretty much cleared out. We didn't get a lot of customers late in the evening, so it was mostly quiet, except for the occasional announcement over the PA system and the hum of the fluorescent lights. My job was to help out on the floor, stocking shelves and cleaning up, but that night my manager asked me to help organize some inventory in the back room. Now, the back room of this store was like a maze. It was huge, full of tall metal racks stacked with boxes and products. There were narrow aisles between the racks, barely wide enough for the pallet jack to fit through. The lighting back there was always a little dim, and it had this kind of stale, musty smell, like cardboard and old dust. Most of the other employees didn't like going back there unless they had to, and I could see why. It wasn't a place you wanted to spend a lot of time in. So I grab my clipboard and head to the back. I'm supposed to check inventory on some items, make sure everything matches up with the list we've got. Simple enough, right? I walk through the door into the back room, and it's like stepping into another world. The noise from the store fades away, replaced by this thick silence. The only sound is the faint hum of the air conditioning system and the occasional clank of metal from somewhere deep in the racks. I start walking down the aisles, looking for the section where the items I need to check are stored. I've done this 100 times, so I know my way around pretty well. But as I'm walking, I get this weird feeling. You know that sensation when you think someone's watching you? It was like that. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see one of my coworkers, but there was no one there. Just rows of boxes and metal racks stretching out into the shadows. I shook it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. It was late, I was tired, and the back room always had this creepy vibe. I kept moving, turning down another aisle. The further I went, the quieter it got. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing in on me. I finally found the section I was looking for, near the back of the room, where the lighting was even dimmer. I started checking the boxes against my list, making sure the numbers matched up. Everything seemed fine, but that feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, and every little sound, the creak of the racks, the rustle of cardboard, made me jump. I kept looking around, trying to see if there was anyone else back there with me, but it was just me and the rows of shelves. After a few minutes, I heard a noise. It was soft, barely audible, but it was there. A shuffling sound, like something moving further down the aisle. I froze, my heart starting to beat faster. I listened, straining to hear, but the noise stopped. I waited a few seconds, then took a few steps forward, peering down the aisle. There was nothing there, just more boxes and shadows. I tried to convince myself it was just the air conditioning kicking on, or maybe one of the boxes settling. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. The noise had been too deliberate, too much like footsteps. I decided to finish up as quickly as I could. I checked the last few boxes, scribbled down some notes, and turned to head back to the front of the back room. As I walked, I kept my eyes on the aisles around me, looking for any sign of movement. I was almost to the door when I heard the noise again, this time louder, coming from behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding. The aisle behind me was empty, but the noise was getting closer, like someone or something was walking down the aisle, just out of sight. I started walking faster, my eyes scanning the rows of shelves. The air felt colder now, and I could feel the sweat on my palms as I gripped the clipboard. I reached the end of the aisle and turned the corner, heading for the main path that led back to the store. That's when I saw it, a shadow, just at the edge of my vision, moving between the racks. It was quick, there 1 second and gone the next, but I was sure I saw it. My stomach dropped, and I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I didn't stop to think. I started walking faster, almost running, my footsteps echoing through the back room. The shadow had been moving in the opposite direction, so I figured if I could just get to the door, I'd be safe. But as I got closer, the lights flickered, and I heard the shuffling sound again, this time from the direction I was heading. I stopped, my mind racing. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear it, the faint sound of movement, like someone brushing against the racks. I turned around, looking for another way out. There was a side door, an emergency exit further down the main path, but it was usually locked from the outside. I decided to go for it. I ran down the main aisle, my footsteps loud in the silence. The shuffling sound grew louder, and I felt like it was right behind me. I reached the side door and grabbed the handle, praying it would open. It did, the door swinging open with a loud creak. I stumbled out into the cool night air, my heart pounding, and slammed the door shut behind me. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath, listening. The back room was silent again, the only sound the distant hum of the store's ventilation system. I made my way around to the front of the store, trying to act normal, like I hadn't just run out of the back room in a panic. I found my manager and told him I'd finished with the inventory, but I didn't mention what had happened. I wasn't even sure how to explain it. A shadow? A noise? It sounded crazy, even to me. For the rest of my shift, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that shadow lurking in the aisles. When my shift finally ended, I got out of there as fast as I could. As I drove home, I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, convinced that something was following me. I didn't go into the back room alone for a long time after that. I'd always find an excuse to bring someone with me, or I'd wait until another employee was around. I never told anyone about what happened. It was too strange, too hard to put into words. Looking back, I still don't know what I saw or heard that night. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, a combination of the dim lighting and the echoing noises of the back room. But sometimes when I think about it, I can still feel that chill, like something is standing just behind me, just out of sight. There's a reason people don't like going into the back rooms alone. It's not just the darkness or the isolation. It's that feeling, the sense that you're not really alone, that something is there with you, watching, waiting, and once you've felt that, it's hard to ever feel completely safe again. I never thought much about what goes on behind the scenes at work until that one night. I was working late, trying to finish up some reports before the deadline. It was a small office, part of a larger complex with several businesses sharing the same building. You know how it is. Lots of long hallways, doors leading to rooms you've never been in, the kind of place that's easy to get lost in if you're not paying attention. It was around 9 p.m., and most of my coworkers had already left. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's pressing in on you. The only sounds were the occasional hum of the air conditioning and the soft clatter of my fingers on the keyboard. I'd been in the zone for hours, barely noticing the time pass. Eventually, I decided I needed a break. My eyes were tired from staring at the screen, and my back was starting to ache from sitting too long. I got up, stretched a bit, and thought about grabbing a snack. We had a small break room with a fridge, but I remembered we were out of anything good. Then I recalled that the backroom storage area sometimes had extra snacks and drinks left over from meetings or company events. I figured I'd go check it out. I hadn't been to the back room often. It was usually locked, and only the office manager had the key, but I'd seen her leave it on her desk earlier. I knew I probably shouldn't be snooping around, but I was hungry, and curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed the key, headed down the hall, and turned the corner toward the storage area. The back room was at the end of a hallway that didn't get much use. The lights were dimmer here, and the carpet looked more worn, like it hadn't been replaced in years. I reached the door, unlocked it, and stepped inside. The room was bigger than I remembered, filled with shelves of office supplies, boxes, and some old furniture covered in dust. It had that stale, musty smell, like it hadn't been aired out in a while. I flipped on the light switch, but the fluorescent lights just flickered a bit before settling into a dim, almost yellow glow. I could barely see the far end of the room. There was a stack of boxes near the back that looked like they hadn't been touched in ages, so I started walking toward them, thinking maybe there were some snacks left over from a past meeting. As I got closer, I noticed something strange. There was another door, almost hidden behind a tall shelf. I'd never noticed it before. It didn't look like the other doors in the office. It was older, made of heavy wood with a tarnished brass handle. It seemed out of place, like it belonged in a different building altogether. My first instinct was to ignore it and keep looking for snacks, but my curiosity got the best of me. I figured it was just another storage closet, maybe where they kept older files or furniture. I reached for the handle and turned it slowly. The door creaked open, and I felt a draft of cool air brush past me, making me shiver. Inside was a narrow hallway, barely wide enough for one person to walk through. The walls were lined with more shelves, but these were empty, covered in dust and cobwebs. There were no lights, just the faint glow from the back room spilling in behind me. I stood there for a moment, debating whether to go in or not. Something about the hallway felt wrong, like it shouldn't be there. But then I heard a noise, a faint rustling sound coming from somewhere further down the hallway. It was so soft that I almost thought I'd imagined it. I took a step forward, peering into the darkness. The sound stopped. I told myself it was probably just a rat or some other small animal. Still, the unease was creeping up on me, and I couldn't shake it off. I turned around to go back, but as I did, the door behind me swung shut with a soft thud. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic started to set in. I banged on the door, hoping someone would hear me, but the building was practically empty. I was alone. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. I still had my phone, so I pulled it out to use the flashlight. The narrow beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing more of the hallway. It seemed to stretch on forever, with no end in sight. I felt my heartbeat quicken, but I knew I couldn't just stand there. I had to find a way out. I started walking, my footsteps echoing off the walls. The air was cold and smelled damp, like a basement. Every now and then, I'd hear that rustling noise again, but it always stopped as soon as I got closer. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, like there were eyes following me in the dark. After what felt like hours, I came to another door. This one was metal, with a small window at the top. I could see a faint light coming from the other side. Relief washed over me, and I hurried to the door, pushing it open. I stepped through and found myself in another room, larger than the first one, but just as dimly lit. The room was filled with old filing cabinets and stacks of papers scattered across the floor. There were desks too, covered in dust, as if no one had been in there for years. The light was coming from a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, swaying slightly as if it had just been bumped. I called out, hoping someone might be there, but my voice just echoed back at me. I walked further into the room, looking for another door, a way out. As I moved past one of the desks, I noticed something strange on the floor. A trail of footprints in the dust, leading toward the back of the room. They weren't mine. They were too big, and they looked fresh, like someone had just walked through there. My heart started pounding again. I followed the footprints with my eyes and saw that they led to another door on the far wall, slightly ajar. I didn't know what else to do. I had to keep going. I pushed the door open and stepped through, finding myself in yet another hallway. This one was different. The walls were lined with old, faded wallpaper, peeling at the edges. The floor was bare concrete, and there were no windows, no signs of life. I kept walking, my footsteps echoing. The hallway twisted and turned, like a maze. Every corner I turned looked the same, and I started to feel like I was going in circles. I tried to leave marks on the walls with my keys, but each time I did, I'd find myself in a new hallway, with no marks in sight. Time seemed to blur. I don't know how long I wandered through those halls. Minutes felt like hours, and every now and then, I'd hear that rustling sound again, like something was just around the corner. But whenever I looked, there was nothing there. Eventually, I came to a dead end. There was a door at the end of the hallway, this one older than the others, with paint peeling off and a rusty handle. I hesitated, but I knew I had no choice. I had to find a way out. I turned the handle, and the door creaked open. I stepped into a room that looked like an old office, with a desk, a chair, and a lamp that was flickering on and off. Papers were strewn everywhere, and there was a strange metallic smell in the air. I walked over to the desk, hoping to find a phone or a map, something that could help me. But then I saw it, a notebook lying open on the desk. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, some of them crossed out, others underlined. I picked it up, my hands shaking, and started to read. The notes were disjointed, ramblings about the building, about doors that led to nowhere, about people who had disappeared. My breath caught in my throat. I flipped through the pages, faster and faster, until I came to the last entry. It was a single line, scrawled in shaky handwriting. Don't trust the doors. They change. I dropped the notebook, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to get out of there, find my way back to the office. I turned to leave, but the door I'd come through was gone. In its place was a blank wall. Panic took over. I ran to the other side of the room, searching for a way out, but there was nothing. Just walls, closing in on me. I banged on the walls, shouting, hoping someone would hear me, but my voice just echoed back. I don't know how long I stayed in that room, shouting and banging, before I finally gave up. I slumped down against the wall, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The lamp was still flickering, casting long shadows on the walls, and then I saw it. A door, right where the wall had been. It hadn't been there a moment ago. I got up slowly, my legs shaking, and reached for the handle. I turned it, half expecting it to be locked, but it swung open easily. I stepped through and found myself back in the original storage room, the one with the shelves and the boxes. The fluorescent lights were still flickering, and everything looked the same. It was as if no time had passed. I stumbled out of the back room, into the hallway, and ran. I didn't stop until I was back at my desk, my heart still pounding. I sat there for a long time, trying to process what had happened, but I couldn't make sense of it. The next day, I asked a coworker about the back room, about the hallway and the doors. They looked at me like I was crazy. They said there was no other hallway, no doors, just a storage room. I went back to check, but everything was normal. The wooden door was gone, and the hallway was just a regular storage area. I don't know what happened that night. Maybe I was just tired, my mind playing tricks on me, but I can't shake the feeling that something in that building wasn't right. Now, every time I work late, I keep my eyes on the doors, listening for that faint rustling sound. And no matter how hungry I am, I never go back to that storage room. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. I remember this one time when I had just started working at this new office, a typical corporate building in the city. You know the kind, tall glass windows, open floor plan, everything looking modern and sterile. My job was alright, nothing special, mostly data entry and some paperwork. It wasn't a bad gig and the pay was decent, so I couldn't complain much. But there was something about the place that didn't sit right with me, even from the beginning. The building had these long hallways that seemed to go on forever. They were well lit during the day, but when the evening rolled around, they felt different, almost eerie. The lights would dim, and everything would take on this yellowish tint from the fluorescent bulbs. I didn't really think much of it at first, just chalked it up to my imagination, or maybe the fact that I was new and still getting used to the place. One day, my manager asked me to stay late to help with some inventory work. We were reorganizing the supply rooms, and he needed an extra pair of hands. I didn't mind staying back. Overtime pay was a nice bonus, and I didn't have much else to do. Most of the office cleared out by 6 p.m., so it was just me, my manager, and a couple of other guys from the admin team. We started moving boxes around, checking off items on a list, the usual boring stuff. After a while, the other guys took off, saying they had plans or needed to catch their trains. My manager was still around, but he was in his office down the hall, so it was basically just me left to finish up. I didn't mind being alone. I usually liked the quiet. The supply room was in the back corner of the building, and it was one of those rooms that felt like a relic from the past. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with old binders, stacks of paper, and office supplies that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. There was a single window, but it faced an alley, so not much light came in. The whole place had this musty smell, like old books and dust. As I was moving some boxes around, I noticed a door in the corner of the room that I hadn't seen before. It was half hidden behind a tall filing cabinet, and it looked old, older than the rest of the building. The paint was chipped, and the handle was this rusty brass that looked like it hadn't been used in forever. Curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to check it out. I pushed the filing cabinet aside and tried the handle. It turned with a creak, and the door swung open. Behind it was a narrow hallway, dimly lit, with a few flickering fluorescent lights hanging from the ceiling. It didn't look like part of the office. more like a maintenance corridor or something. I figured it was just some old part of the building that no one used anymore, maybe storage or a way to get to the utility areas. I stepped into the hallway, my footsteps echoing off the walls. The air felt different in there, cooler, and the smell of dust was even stronger. I walked down the hallway, my curiosity growing. The walls were bare, just plain white paint that was peeling in places. There were no signs, no doors, just a long, straight corridor. After a few minutes, I started to feel a bit uneasy. I couldn't hear anything except my own footsteps, and the hallway seemed to go on forever. I looked back, and I could still see the light from the supply room, but it felt farther away than it should have. I kept walking, thinking maybe I'd find a way out or at least a door that led somewhere. That's when I noticed it, a low hum, like the sound of machinery. It was faint at first, but it got louder as I walked. It was coming from up ahead, and I thought maybe it was the building's heating system or some electrical equipment. I followed the sound, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The hallway took a sharp turn to the right, and as I rounded the corner, I saw a door. It was different from the one I'd come through, newer, metal, with a small window set into it. The hum was louder now, coming from behind the door. I hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open. Inside was a large, empty room. The walls were concrete, and there were no windows. In the center of the room was a metal box, about the size of a small fridge, with wires and cables running from it to the walls. The hum was coming from the box, a steady, rhythmic sound that filled the room. I took a step inside, feeling a shiver run down my spine. The air was colder in here, almost like the temperature had dropped a few degrees. I walked up to the box, trying to see what it was, but there were no markings, no labels, nothing to indicate what it was for. The hum was louder now, almost vibrating through the floor. That's when I heard a noise behind me, a faint shuffling sound like footsteps. I spun around, but there was no one there, just the open door leading back to the hallway. My heart started to race, and I felt a knot of fear tightening in my stomach. I didn't like being in that room. Something about it felt wrong, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I backed away from the box, keeping my eyes on the door. I just wanted to get out of there, back to the supply room, back to where it was safe. As I reached the door, I heard the footsteps again, this time louder, like they were coming from the hallway. I stepped out, looking around, but the corridor was empty. I started walking back, moving quickly, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The door to the supply room seemed farther away than before, like the hallway had stretched. I could still see the light from the room, but it was faint, like a distant star. I picked up my pace, almost running now, my heart pounding. The footsteps behind me kept getting louder, faster, matching my own. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The hallway seemed endless, stretching out in front of me, the walls closing in. The light from the supply room was still there, but it felt like I'd never reach it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I burst through the door into the supply room, slamming it shut behind me. I leaned against the door, breathing hard, my hands shaking. The footsteps had stopped, and the room was silent again. I looked around, half expecting to see someone standing there, but I was alone. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the footsteps were probably just the echo of my own. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, like someone, or something, had been following me. I didn't tell anyone about the hallway or the room. I just finished up my work as quickly as I could and got out of there. As I was leaving, I glanced back at the door in the corner, half hidden behind the filing cabinet. It was closed now, the rusty handle looking innocent enough, but I knew what was behind it. The next day, I came in and tried to act normal. I didn't want anyone to think I was crazy. I avoided the supply room as much as I could, sticking to the main parts of the office where there were people around. But I couldn't stop thinking about that hallway, that empty room, and the sound of those footsteps. A few weeks later, I overheard some of my coworkers talking about the building. They were saying how it used to be a part of an old factory complex, how there were all these hidden corridors and storage rooms that no one used anymore. Some of them joked about the place being haunted, about strange noises and shadows in the halls. I laughed along with them, pretending not to care, but inside, I felt a chill. I never went back to that supply room, never opened that door again. But sometimes, when I'm working late and the office is empty, I swear I can hear it. That low hum, echoing through the walls, and the faint sound of footsteps following me, just out of sight. It's been a while since that happened, and I've moved on to a different job in a different building. But every now and then, when I'm walking down a quiet hallway or hear the hum of machinery, I think about that night, and I wonder if there's more to those back rooms than I'll ever know. More to the empty corridors that stretch out into the dark, where the light never quite reaches.